Hello, this is Stephen Nojiri, and this is another Tada Genji tradition video. In this video, we're going to focus specifically on the Kusunoki tradition. And in this video, we're going to be looking at the usage of powders, or not just powders, but overall formulas, to disguise yourself as someone who is sick and or infirmed, etc., etc. Now this comes from Kusunoki-ryu, so as you know, this channel focuses on Tada Genji tradition videos, and the Kusunoki-ryu is part of that continuum. So here we're specifically focusing on Kusunoki-ryu. So in the Kusunoki-ryu, there is a technique called hinsao. Now you'll see on the screen the kanji. Now this is normally pronounced hinso and uses different kanji. It means transformation, or specifically it means disguise. However, in the document, it uses these specific kanji, which is pronounced hinsao, which sounds close to hinso, but technically it would be hinsao. Now, this technique also appears in the nattori, where the name shifts to hinka or hinge, depending on the situation. That term can be hinka or hinge. Now, we also know that the nattori-ryu's shinobi arts come from Kusunoki-ryu, so it makes sense that we would find this in nattori-ryu. So, the primary source for hinsao comes from the main Kusunoki documents, which I've been referring to as the kaden, or the family tradition documents. So hinsao is a technique that many people believe is associated with sneaking into a place, and by further extension that is a ninja specific technique. This, however, is not actually correct. While one can argue that the concept of hinsao is about making yourself look like a different person, and it is, it's the generic, the generic concept of changing your appearance, of disguising yourself. The documentation speaks to a specific history of the technique with a specific purpose. So just because when you see the idea, you see the word hinso or hinka, hinke, hinsao, and it means transformation or disguise, and it's very tempting to think that that has a very generic application. But when we look at the history in the documents, we see a very specific history and a very specific application. So this video is trying to briefly explain to you what hinsao is and where it comes from. And yes, it becomes part of the shinobi arts, later in history, but originally it has a specific use. And that specific use is to escape. Yes, that's it. Escaping. That's the original usage of the technique. Originally, it was part of the techniques used to escape a losing position during a battle or a siege. So, samurai would train in hinsao and would do it in the following ways. So, well, first, they would use various powders and oils as makeup to make themselves look tired and infected, sick with some kind of illness. They would also match the look with behaviors of being tired, sick, starved, etc., etc. And then they would use this combination of look and behavior to escape a losing situation. So now let's look at the documents. In the Kusunoki tradition, which is what I've put on the screen, so what I've done here is that's the name of the technique in the Kusunoki text. And the first part you now know is hinsao, and the second part is basically it means formula, and in modern day usage it can mean the word prescription. So that's the best way to understand it, is formula. So this is a teaching which lists several materials that can be used for essentially as makeup. So the formulary contains things from types of spices to types of oils, types of fats, types of minerals, etc., etc., etc. The primary goal is to be able to obtain gray, black, red, and yellow pigments, and then through different formulas and different techniques, making yourself look certain ways with those colors. Now I should also mention that in the Kusunoki-ryu, the hinsao method is also considered to have a spiritual aspect, and so in the Kusunoki tradition, along with the teachings of how to physically do the technique, there are also sort of some spiritual teachings that go with it, and there's even mantra that go along with the technique as well. And so the basic premise is that you would pretend to be a servant, a manual laborer, somebody who's a normal non-combatant, you know, quote unquote, just the guy working there, you know, just the person working in the kitchen, so to speak, right, of the enemy. And then you would escape disguised with dirty and tattered clothes and with the makeup that makes you look tired and dirty, etc. You are essentially making yourself look like a commoner who's just kind of going through it and is trying to just get the hell out, basically. And so, as you see on the screen, the idea was that during Kusunoki's time anyway, the samurai mostly ignored commoners running back and forth. And so a sickly commoner running from a battle is a very common sight, and it would not have gathered attention. And also, I should say that in Kusunoki-ryu has an entire section of teachings devoted to clever escape arts. And so this comes from that section. So now that we looked at Kusunoki bit, let's shift over to look at the nattori-ryu bit. And in nattori-ryu we find the same teaching in a section called Hinginurun, which comes from the shonenki. And it opens with it has a philosophical opening about overconfidence, but once you get past that part, then it actually gets into the actual technique. And it starts by discussing clothing to adopt and ways to change your hairstyle. It kind of just lists some things, and then it gets into the formulas. So in the shonenki, it gives 3 formulas, and you'll see on the next slide that it's very similar to the Kusunoki formula. So as I said, in keeping with its Kusunoki roots, the nattori document focuses on gray, black, red, and yellow color schemes. So you're trying to create some kind of makeup, for lack of a better word, that has these colors. The shonenki gives 3 different combinations, which are: the first combination is the red arrow, the second is the yellow arrow, and the third is the orange arrow. And the first combination is a gray ink, vermilion mixed in with white face powder. Then the second one is a diluted version of that white face powder mixed with yellow, and by yellow it means kiwada powder, or yellow ochre, and vermilion. And then the third formula is a kiwada, or actually it's, in this particular case, it's not just kiwada, it's a diluted kiwada, which is similar to the second formula, in which you have the diluted white face powder with the kiwada, and the third one is diluted kiwada with red and indigo. So subtle versions between these 3, but in the end what you're looking at are still gray, black, red, and yellow color schemes. So these 3 formulas are very similar to each other, and again very similar to the Kusunoki colors as well, and the Kusunoki formulas very similar. Some different materials from the Kusunoki, but still the idea is there. Some makeup of these colors. So the nattori text then goes on to say the student should experiment with the 3 formulas until they figure out what method works, avoiding methods which don't work. And it goes on also to warn that simply looking sick or invalid is not enough. One must properly behave and act like they're actually sick and invalid, etc., etc., etc. So it's a matching of how, the makeup is only one part of it, and then you have to also dress and act correctly as well. The Kusunoki documents, have more than this. So the nattori document has like a small bit, and then the Kusunoki has more, right? So, and in addition to the makeup and in addition to the clothes, the Kusunoki documents also teach things such as the samurai using this technique should not be afraid to approach people and ask for food and water and supplies. Someone who is actually fleeing a battle and is sick and poor would not hesitate to ask for food or water, right? So you got to look sick, tired, and dirty, which through makeup and clothing, and you got to be acting like you're sick and tired and dirty, And part of that specifically is begging for food and water, right? So that if you look this way and you're begging for stuff, it's very easy to be ignored and told to go away. So even though the material used changes over time, the basic methods and teachings remain the same. And as for that color scheme, you just really need to just simply study how human beings look when sick. Stuff like the gray on the lips, the yellow for skin tone, dark spots, red on the nostrils and sides of mouth, anything that might be inflamed or sort of rubbed raw, stuff like that. And to be honest, you don't really need an old Kusunoki manual to tell you this. You can just look at sick people, or you can Google modern day illness or sick makeup tutorials if you want, super details on that. What I find interesting is just for fun, I did this as well. I Googled, illness makeups, and it's the same thing. So the techniques that people use to make modern day special effects, people looking sick, these are the same colors and the same techniques used in the Kusunoki manual, and by extension in the nattori manual as well. So I thought that was interesting. So in summary, this technique comes from Kusunoki-ryu, wherein is provided multiple formulas and instructions for achieving the looks and the behavior. Then once a samurai can shift their look, transform themselves, has a good ability to disguise themselves. This technique is used primarily for escaping a bad situation. The technique also appears in the nattori-ryu, which is an extension of Kusunoki-ryu, particularly with like the shinobi arts and things like that. And in the nattori-ryu, some teachings are given along with these three formulas. Now, it may also be possible that nattori-ryu has more teachings based about this technique, but for now, we'll just, as far as what I have seen, what I am aware of, this is the extent to the nattori-ryu. But it may have more. It's always possible that nattori-ryu has more. But the Kusunoki-ryu, unlike nattori-ryu, considers the technique, or as far as I know, considers the technique to have spiritual aspects. So in Kusunoki-ryu, definitely it has spiritual aspects. And this technique has accompanying mantra. So there's the teachings on the behavior and the teachings on the makeup and disguise part. Then there's a spiritual teaching, and then there's mantra associated with it. And these, as far as I know from what I've seen, don't exist in nattori-ryu.